You also want to look at things like your proximity to sensitive receptors. If you have a facility that's going to be close to a school, you may want to consider your toxics and give them an extra point value than you would if you had a facility that's located out in the middle of nowhere or somewhere with winds that are moving all the emissions offshore versus onshore. Those types of things. And a weighting factor allows this process to move forward in a way that makes sense for the area that is evaluating the facility. The other thing to include is the synergistic effects. If we get away from this pollutant by pollutant type of an evaluation, then we can take into account that a wet scrubber for sulfur dioxide could also control particulate matter. We can take a look at mercury control, say for a coal-fired power plant. If you're going to apply an SCR for NOx, if you're going to use flue gas desulfurization for the sulfur emissions, and if you put your particulate filter in the right place, you can actually be controlling mercury. So you don't need to add another control device on for the mercury. It'll take care of itself. And then you have to add in the other waste pathways. Here's a look at indirect energy, and this is just a slide of the cost of scrubbers, different wet scrubbers. And here is the power required for those wet scrubbers per 200,000 cubic meters of air treated. And so you can see that a sodium-based wet scrubber, when you're looking at, you have to treat water on the back end, you're looking at the need for the sodium hydroxide to go into the scrubber, those might be negatives, but the positive is it takes less than half the power of some of these other scrubbers. And when we look at this in a holistic way, we can actually start to factor that in and take that into account. But I think we've already talked about waste disposal for solid waste and for waste. The other thing is the overall footprint. Sometimes we don't have a lot of land, and that's especially true here in Singapore. Land is at a premium. Land costs can be quite high. So you may want to consider not going with electrostatic precipitators because they take up a lot of room. You may want to consider some of your options with bottom ash disposal because typically it's landfill, and again, we're taking up a lot of room. So that's something in an area that has not a lot of available vacant land you might want to add into your equation when deciding what to look at for a facility. This is an example. Again, this is a real-life example, so I wanted to bring as much real life into this as I possibly could, of why we want to look at not just one facility, but multiple facilities if there's shared resources between those facilities. This is an existing borate plant. It sits out in the middle of the California desert. They have 26,000 acres on their facility. This is just the power generation and steam generation into the plant. If the borate gets down below about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, then it becomes crystals, so their pipes get clogged. So they have to keep steam going, they have to keep the pipes heated to be able to process the borate through the plant. This is the existing cogeneration steam and boiler system operated by the borate plant. This is a power and steam combined cycle plant. Power is sold to the grid. The steam is sent over to the borate plant. This is a different company. It's a separately owned and operated by a different company facility. This facility is going away. The ages of these facilities, the cogen unit that's currently in place was built in 1984, produces about 48 megawatts power, and about half the steam that they need. They have additional boilers to produce steam. This facility was also built about 1984, and they're getting ready to retire these units. They're going away. The borate facility is proposing to get a permit to take their current 48 megawatts, install 2 new turbines with steam generators that would provide enough steam to run their entire plant. So one-on-one cycle systems with duct firing in the heat recovery steam generation units. Produce about 77 megawatts of power, will produce all of the steam that they need. They're going to add selective catalytic reduction and catalytic oxidation onto these units so that we're controlling the NOx, the carbon dioxide. Because of the efficiency of the new units, the actual emission rates for, even though they're going from 44 megawatts to 77 megawatts higher units, they're going to have negative emissions for particulates, NOx, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, virtually all of the criteria pollutants. However, when just going from these units to these units, their net greenhouse gas emissions totals over 100,000 tons per year. So EPA is working with EPA to get their permit for this facility, and it will go out for public notice showing a net increase of over 100,000 tons per year of greenhouse gases. Because they can't take into consideration this plant is going away. If they were able to public notice and go out for the public record stating that this plant is going away, all of the emissions from this project would net negative. But because of our current permitting system, because of the way it works, they will not be able to public notice that. They can make comments in the public register, but EPA cannot consider the net effect of this plant leaving and this plant being forced to take on this new project, if you want to look at it that way, to be able to operate the rest of their borate plant. They have to have the steam, they have to have the power. And that's when these types of synergistic relationship between facilities really should be taken into account in the permitting mechanism. Because this looks like we have a huge greenhouse gas increase. And the EPA has already told this facility that there are people in California, regardless of the project, regardless of what it is, that will make comment and ask the project to not move forward based on an increase of greenhouse gases. The common term, not used publicly but used amongst the industry folks, is these are people that say build absolutely nothing, absolutely no time anywhere. So it stands for BANAS, they're bananas. They will protest no matter what it is. But they would probably be happy if they knew that the overall project net effect was negative for greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to actually see an overall decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. So this is an example of multi-pollutant, multi-facility considerations and permitting that makes sense. We have a lot of examples here in Singapore of facilities that use steam from another facility. A facility that has a high chloride waste stream may send that to a boiler. That boiler may use that as a fuel, produce steam, send it back to the other company. That's an example. Each of those two companies under this regime would be permitted separately, but if an additional boiler were added at the steam plant to take into account that they could burn more of the waste from the other facility, that could be a net positive if we were able to add and look at those two facilities together. Most cogeneration units, any type of existing cogeneration plant or proposed future cogeneration plant, if you could permit them or look at them, or at least get out in the public record the net effect of both facilities, that would be a more progressive, but also I think it would be a more safe, more environmentally protective way of permitting these facilities than to continue to look at each facility one by one by one. There's just a bit of a synopsis I already talked through of what's going on with that particular facility, but there is in writing, so if you want to take a look at that. I think the pictures are more exciting. Then I talked also about the public perception. It's not only just the people we term as bananas, don't build anything anywhere anytime, but also it's the idea of not in my backyard. We don't have any problem with your particular project, but I don't want it anywhere near where I live. And that is kind of we call them NIMBYs, but